Austin, first off, thank you so much for being here and for making the time for us to get together.
Thank you for having me.
So, Austin, I want to start this conversation asking you to briefly describe your path to what you are doing today.
Well, I was a guy, my heroes are all poets and writers, so I just figured I would have a day job forever. I didn't really plan on this being my main gig. So when I first started out, I really wanted to be a writer. I really wanted to have my book on the shelf. That was my dream. But when I got out of college, I got a job in the library, in a public library in Ohio. And that was really helpful. I think every writer should either work in a library or they should work in a bookstore, because when you actually see what people actually read, it's a reality check for the kind of work that you want to do. And so I worked in the library for like 2 years, and the big thing that happened for me is I started a blog and I started a personal website. And that just once I figured out blogging and being online, that was the big opportunity for me, because once I got my blog, I was like, I can be whoever I want to be on this. I can explore whatever I want to explore. I can make whatever I want to make and put it right here on this blog in front of everyone for them to see it. So when I was working in the library, my idea was I would go and watch other writers give talks or readings and stuff like that. This was sort of before everyone had a cell phone with a really good camera on it. So I would go to readings and I would draw the writers, because I'm a visual artist too. And I found out that people love to be drawn. That's like one of their, if you draw someone, if you take a picture of someone, they're like, whatever. But if you draw someone, there's a level of attention you've paid, but then you have this little artifact that's unduplicatable, I guess. So I met some writers that way. I actually met a couple of writers in Cleveland, where I was living at the time, by drawing them and going to their readings. And that sort of became a thing for me that I realized fairly early on, is that if you want to get fans, if you want to be someone worthy of fans, you have to be a fan first. So you have to be someone who pays attention to the world that you want to be in before you can be in it. And so I spent a lot of time reading and reading the work of other writers and drawing them and doing that kind of work. And then I moved to Austin about 13 years ago. My wife got into graduate school here, and I got really interested in web design because I was already running my blog. And so I got a job here as a web designer, and a couple of years, about only a year after we moved here, my newspaper blackout poems got picked up. And if people haven't seen those, what I do is I take an article from the New York Times and I black out most of the article, leaving just a few words behind. It sort of looks like if the CIA did haiku. So those got kind of popular, and those became my first book, Newspaper Blackout, which 10 people have read. So when that came out, I had my book. It was my dream. Oh, here we go. I have a book. It's on the shelf, and I kept my day job. But a few years, I think a year or so after that, I decided I wanted to switch and become a marketing copywriter. So I worked downtown at this little marketing agency and sort of learned the art of, learned the advertising business and the marketing world a little bit, enough for me to realize that it kind of disgusted me. And but no, I learned some really valuable lessons there. And that's when I was working that job, a community college asked me to give a talk to the students there. And I gave this talk called How to Steal Like an Artist. And after the talk, it went really well in the room, but I'm sort of one of those digital native millennial people where it's well, if it's not online, it doesn't really exist, So I took the slides and the text from the talk and put that on my blog. And that was the first thing of mine that like truly went viral. It sort of overnight I had sort of been building an audience up. So like there were some people who actually read my blog, but once that piece went online, that just sort of went crazy. And it was clear then that was going to become my next book. And Steal Like an Artist, when it came out, my publisher, Workman, wanted me to go on book tour. So I quit my job and I went on book tour, and then the book became a bestseller. And, my life just kind of changed, and this became, what I do. So now it's sort of like, I've written 2 books since then. So I just sort of wrapped up this trilogy that began with Steal Like an Artist.
So let's go back to this moment, this talk, Steal Like an Artist. You shared there with the students 10 things you wish have known when you were a young creator.
Yeah.
What were those 10 things?
Okay, so Steal Like an Artist is 10 things I wish I had known when I was first starting out. So number 1 is Steal Like an Artist. And it's very simple, is that no creative work that we do is completely original. Nothing comes from nowhere, and every idea that you have is sort of the accumulation of all the ideas that's come before, or you take one idea and put it with another idea and you get something new. So it's sort of this idea that, the way towards finding original work isn't trying to be original, it's actually taking from a lot of different artists and a lot of influence from a lot of different places and kind of mashing it up into your own thing. Number 2 is don't wait until you know who you are to get started. A lot of people think that they have to know who they are before they can make stuff, and I think it's the opposite. I think it's in the course of making stuff and doing your creative work that you actually discover who it is that you are. Number 3, write the book you want to read. That's real simple. That's just about, you need to put into the world what you would like to see there. So you need to make the music you want to hear. You need to start the business you want to see run, Number 4 is use your hands. We have this idea that ideas start in the mind and then they're executed by the body, but it's actually more of a dance between the two. It's like a two-way street. So when you're working on your creative work, like if you're strumming the guitar or you're like working on a clay pot or if you're typing, sometimes your hands know where to go more than your brain does. And so it's very important to bring your body into creative work. Number 5 is side projects and hobbies are important. And so I think it's very important for creative people to have things that they do on the side, because you'll find that if you have rich hobbies or side projects, it's often when you're working on those projects that you either get an idea for the thing you're supposed to be working on, or that's the side project that actually takes off and takes you where you want to be. Number 6 is the secret is to do good work and share it with people. So that's the first part is hard, and it's always been hard, is you have to do good work. The second part, sharing it with people, was really hard up until not that long ago. And now, everyone has the ability to share anything they want with anyone. And so to have the guts to use whatever mediums or technologies available to you to get your work out there. Number 7 is geography is no longer our master. That's very simple, is that, when I was growing up, I was in this little, I grew up in the middle of a cornfield in southern Ohio, a very rural area, and I didn't know any artists or writers. I didn't know anyone who did the kind of work that I wanted to do. And now, of course, it doesn't necessarily matter where you live. You can still connect with people you want to meet or who love the same things that you do. Number 8 is be nice. The world is a small town. So sort of a corollary to geography is no longer our master is just to be kind and to be nice and to try to create the kind of world that you want to exist in is a very powerful thing as a creative person. We have this idea that creative people are weirdo, hard to get along with, introvert, sociopaths, a lot of the time. And the truth of the matter is that better work gets made when people are actually decent to each other and they create a good atmosphere. Number 9 is be boring. It's the only way to get work done. I think when young creative people are starting out, they imagine this very glamorous life of, traveling and being under the lights and, being interviewed and stuff like that. But the majority of creative work happens in your studio. It's about sitting down at the same place every day and making things happen. It's about sitting down and writing a song every day, or it's about sitting down and writing a page or doing a page in your sketchbook, or it's the days tend to, little bits of daily effort over time turns into a career. And every overnight success you see is, you're just seeing the results of a long accumulation of a lot of days, usually. And number 10 is creativity is subtraction. And that's a very simple point, is that if you want to do creative work, it's actually the things that you leave out of your life that are as important as the things that you put into your life. So, you have to kind of, in order to focus on the stuff that you really want to do, you have to leave some things out of your life. You might have to cut out a few hours of television. You might have to
Netflix.
You might not have, if you're like me and you have a family and you work full time, you might not have much of a social life.
There is one that I think it's a core idea of the book, and actually is what gives the name to the book. There is still like an artist, and as you mentioned, this remix culture that we live in. But I would like you to explain a little bit more, because we are talking, you were saying the idea is to create your own things by remixing everything that is out there. So I want you to tell a little bit the difference between doing that. I mean, what's the right way of mashing up what's out there to create your own work, and the difference with plagiarism? Right.
So I get this a lot. First of all, people get very upset by the word steal. They ask me like, well, Austin, why do you have to use the word steal? And usually I say, well, I use the word steal because I'm not very original. And then I make a long list of all the artists I used to study who used that word. Picasso said artist theft. David Bowie said he was a tasteful thief. Bob Dylan, he said steal a little, they throw you in jail. Steal a lot, they make you a king. It's like I use that word because other people use that word. But actually, it's not really about stealing, and it's definitely not about plagiarism. I actually think that Steal Like an Artist is a fairly traditional message, in that this is how art got made for hundreds of years. Our whole concept of being original, as in you're just this unique soul who pulls out interesting work out of your soul or your brain or whatever, that's kind of a new invention. For hundreds of years, it was like you learned to make art by copying the works of others and getting a craft built up. But as far as the message of Steal, the way I talk about it is there's good theft and there's bad theft. So there's kind of a code of, there's honor amongst thieves. So good theft is when you actually take the time to understand the things that you're borrowing or stealing from. So to study deeply the things that came before you, and not just kind of skim the surface of whatever's popular. Good theft is when you steal from a lot of different artists, and you're taking things from lots of different places. Bad theft is when you just take from one person, right? There's a great quote by a guy named Wilson Mizner, and he says, if you steal from one author, it's plagiarism. If you steal from 100 authors, it's research, right? And good theft is when you're able to sort of weave that stuff into something that is new versus something that is just copied. It's just plagiarism. So it's the difference between ripping off and remixing. And so but it's mainly, if you look at some of, I'm reading a biography right now about Vincent van Gogh. And he's a perfect example of steal like an artist. This is a guy who just read voraciously. He was, I don't know that a lot of people know this. They know that his brother Theo was an art dealer, but his uncle, Vincent van Gogh, that he was named for, was a very famous art dealer. So Van Gogh was actually an art dealer for part of his life and spent a huge amount of time collecting images. You could easily reproduce images in that era. So Van Gogh was living in this era where you could actually like get a copy of some of the great masterpieces and like tack it on your wall. So Van Gogh had these scrapbooks full of all these images, and he was taking from a lot of different things. But what he did that's so interesting that all great artists do is they sort of absorb all this stuff, they take it in, and then what they put out is something unique. You know, there's something about all that stuff mixing together in their brain, and that comes out of their hand, and it's Van Gogh. You know, so if you look at a lot of the really great, you know, musicians, writers, thinkers, creators, whatever, they're doing that. They're constantly absorbing lots of different material in all kinds of different places, and then they sort of internalize it, and they put something new out.
Austin, when you were explaining the type of things that you do every day, like to keep your creativity going, that brought to my mind an idea. There is like a hot topic always in the creativity world. There is, where do ideas come from? And we all know friends who say that they get the best ideas when they are having a shower or exercising, listening to music, walking, as you said. But then there are these very famous artists like Pablo Picasso, who once said that inspiration exists, but definitely has to find you working. So in what side are you? I mean, do you think that creativity is something that is a sort of an epiphany, or it's something that requires effort, hard work, concentration?
I think it's both. I mean, I think what happens, for me personally, so much of getting an idea is about pattern recognition. Like, we all sort of like, the thing I've noticed is that whenever I get that epiphany, it feels like, oh my God, I have this great idea. I am a genius, you know? And then I go back on my sketchbooks, and like 2 years before I already had that idea, I had written it down. It just didn't seem like a great idea at the time. And then over time, it sort of like stuck in the back of my head and then became the epiphany. So like, that happens to me a lot. That could just be my terrible memory. But like, that happens a lot, and that, you know, something that seems like an epiphany is actually something you've been working on for a while. And the other thing that I also agree with the idea that, you know, you don't need an idea before you start working. I think that's the real secret. Is it's not that you don't get ideas coming to you all the time. That happens all the time. We all know that. Like, you know, it's usually at the most inopportune moments, right? When you're in the shower, or when you're driving, or when you're having a conversation with your friends or something, you get that aha moment. I think it's just being ready for both, being ready to receive the idea when it comes, no matter where you are, but also, if your mind is empty, to sit down and have some sort of creative practice where you work no matter whether you have a good idea or not. So for me, that is really easy for me. I sit down with my notebook every day in the morning, whether I have an idea or I don't. And I sit down and I start writing. And it could just be, it's really hot today, I don't know what to write, right? And you just write that. And in the course of getting your hand moving, you get so bored to death of your own stupid internal monologue that eventually you're like, oh, wait a minute, I had this idea the other day. And that's how it gets started. And then you remember something that you had, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's this combination of like, yes, I always have a pocket notebook on me, and I'm always like getting ideas when I'm at the grocery store or something, and I like pull my pocket notebook out and write it down. But I'm also like, I also have a place that I go to work every day, whether there are ideas or not. Now, I think the big secret is, for me as a writer specifically, is if you keep that pocket notebook on you all the time, and then you open that up whenever you need to sit down and actually write, you always have an idea to go off of. Because if you take down enough bad ideas or good ideas in your notebook, there's always something to write about when you get back to your desk.
How important is to sometimes get bored to death, even, to have creative ideas? Because when your mind starts connecting things that otherwise would never connect. And I was really curious because you have 2 kids.
Yes.
So, and you're a writer.
Yes.
So I anticipate that you don't have a lot of time to get bored. So how do you do that?
Well, raising kids can be incredibly boring, actually, in spots, like the playground, because it's like, it's not for parents, right? A playground is not for parents, it's for kids. So, but I think boredom is crucial, and I actually see it in my kids. If if we have the TV going all night, for example, there's always something to look at. But I've noticed it even in my kids, if we just turn the TV off and there's nothing to do, eventually they'll find something to do. It might be wreck the house, but it could also be like, well, let's make a fort out of pillows, or, let's go over and draw a little bit. But boredom is essential to me as a creative person, which is why I do things like when I fly, I never get Wi-Fi. I never pay for Wi-Fi on a flight. I don't bring movies with me on a plane. I want to be totally bored, because when you get on a plane, it's like one of the last times in your life where you literally have to turn your phone off, and no one expects to get you when you're like up in the air. So like that's a great place to experience what I call airplane mode. In your phone, when you turn your phone into airplane mode, well, airplane mode doesn't just have to be for the airplane. I think that's the thing with the phone, is that the phone is this incredible tool. I mean, you're basically carrying this multimedia studio around in your pocket all day. The problem is that we've never had tools before that can distract us as much as they can help us create things. So the phone is like this amazing tool if you use it the right way, but it's also just this constant distraction machine. And so if you can kind of make your smartphone stupid, that's one really good way to get bored. Like you just turn off get rid of your games and get rid of Twitter, and like you can start to recapture, some of your mind again. But it's crucial to be bored, I think. And this is not a good time, for better or worse. This is the worst era in human history to try to get bored, because, it's 24/7 entertainment wherever you want it.
Austin, I want to change the topic a little bit, because I know both of your parents were in the educational system, let's say. I think your dad was a professor for Ohio State. Your mom, I think, was a guidance counselor, and then worked in elementary and high school.
Yeah, she was a principal.
How that influenced you? I mean, how do you remember your parents' education?
Well, I mean, my mom rode me pretty hard as far as like, you're going to get straight A's and you're smart and you should achieve things. And my mom has this clipping from Charles Schultz, the guy who drew Peanuts. She has this clipping on it that says, an education is the next best thing to a pushy mother. That's like, she's got that in the bathroom. So she was, I was always taught that school is like my job, and you're smart, you get good grades, you go to college, that type of thing. And my dad's side, I talked to you about him building his barn. He's more of an autodidact, in that he's more of a self-taught guy. Even though he has advanced degrees, he's someone who learns more by doing. He doesn't learn well from like sitting in a classroom. He's someone who works better by just figuring things out on a project by project basis. And so having those two in my life when I was younger was really interesting. Now, it's weird because I was such a good student, and such a sort of achiever student, just like get A's and get scholarships and do all that. It's interesting to me that I only have the career I have, and I truly believe this. I only have the career I have because I had the guts to not go back to school. I made a concentrated decision at a certain point in my life that I was not going to go grad school. I was going to have a job and work on my stuff and just become whoever I kind of wanted to be. And I truly believe that had I gone to a graduate program, it would have taken me longer to get where I am now, because I don't think the kind of work that I'm doing, the kind of work that I was doing is not the kind of work I would have done in graduate school. It wouldn't have been serious enough.
That was Austin because, you were a good student, an achiever, as you said, but I read that school for you was like a very disturbing stage, because you could not understand why everything has to be so siloed. I learn math, now I learn literature, now I learn science. So that's why you decided, okay, it's not for me.
So I'm a person that was very interested in different things. So I loved, for example, like I always loved algebra. Like I always loved math. And then I always loved art. And I always loved writing in English class. But there was no real way in school to sort of figure out how those things would go together. So like when you go to school, it's sort of like you're either good at art or you're really good at writing, and then you have to pick one. I felt very much like I had to pick as a student. And so I felt pushed towards the thing that I thought was more serious, which was literature in my case. I thought literature was, more serious than art. So I pushed myself that way. But I didn't really discover what my true talent was until I found a way to sort of bring writing and art back together. And that's very hard to do in an educational, like in a school setting, that's very hard to do, because you have things that are supposed to be, you have art class and you have writing class or English class, And so it was only later when I got out of school that I realized you can mix these things together and do whatever you want to with them.
How is this experience influencing your parenting, how you are educating your kids?
It influences me in that I don't put as much pressure on school for my kids. I actually think school, for my boys are very bright. They love to read already, even though they're little. For me, school is more about them being exposed to a lot of different things and having a sort of social experience, meeting different kinds of people. But I believe for them, the majority of their really deep learning is going to happen on the edges of school, like either at home or whatever. So it sort of takes the burden off of school for me, and that I truly believe that their best educational experiences are probably going to be outside of school. That doesn't mean I don't want them to go and do their work and be kind to their teacher and follow orders and stuff like that. I just don't have this idea that school is going to be the thing that molds them into really interesting, kind, creative thinkers. Like, I'm much more convinced that it will be their home life, their friends, and their city, their surrounding area that will influence them as much as school will. But they're also really little. I mean, I have a 6 and a 4-year-old, but I think what my kids have done for me creatively, people ask me all the time, what are you doing to inspire your kids? And I say, actually, it's the opposite in my house. It's my kids who inspire me, because they come to this world, when they got here, when they arrived, they were learning machines. They were ready to learn everything about the world immediately. And there were no subjects, there was nothing stopping them from learning everything they wanted to know. And my kids still they don't know that knowledge is limited to subjects quite yet. Like, my son will read a book about the solar system, and then he'll go make an album about it. So he'll record a song about Jupiter, and then that's how he processes things. So it's real natural for him right now. And I found it personally inspiring as an artist, because my kids have sort of freed me up to understand that you really should go, when you're studying and when you're learning, you should really go on your genuine interest, because your genuine interest in things will take you down an educational path that is much richer and more interesting than something that is prescribed for you by a curriculum. And I truly believe that. I truly believe that if you take a kid who loves, when I was a teenager, I loved Green Day. Like, Green Day was like the coolest band in the world for me, and I just learned Green Day songs on my guitar, and I wrote songs like Green Day or blah, blah, blah. And then I discovered that there was this band called the Ramones that influenced Green Day, right? And this is how things go with creative work, is that if we start from a kid's natural interest, I truly believe that if you let them sort of saturate in that interest, they will start to go deeper, and they'll build out from that interest point this whole world, and the connections they will make between the things that they learn will be so much stronger than it would be if they were just being presented something at school. So now I just believe really strongly in a sort of individual education, and that you start from where you are and you slowly discover things. And if you go slow and weird, it's okay, because the connections are that much stronger, if that makes sense. Because if you can get a crash course and stuff. You can have someone dump the whole history of music on you in a couple of weeks, but the connections there won't be as rich as if you just start listening to one musician, just learn everything about them that there is to know, and then you discover who influenced them, and you just slowly build a picture for yourself.
Austin, I love when you mention how much you are learning for your kids. I mean, I remember that I have hear you say many times that you bring your kids to your work, that you share your work with your kids, and you listen to what their opinion is about the stuff that you do. And is there any in particular that surprised you? Is there any wow moments that you had?
I am shocked at how able young kids are. I'm shocked at how good the work can be if they have the right tools. I think a lot of people, just take drawing in particular. A lot of people, when they give kids stuff to draw with, they give them really shitty materials, basically. They give them oh, here's some garbage paper and here's a crayon. Have you tried drawing with a crayon? It sucks. Crayons suck to draw with. They're not easy to draw with. Whereas if you give a kid an oil pastel or a Crayola makes these things called slick sticks, they're basically they're just really waxy. They're sort of oily, but they get this really thick line. If you give a 3-year-old one of those and a good piece of paper, he'll make you a Basquiat. It looks it's just incredible. So, and I think the same thing with my son, Owen. He has access. I let him use my old iMac that has GarageBand on it. And so the things that Owen does in GarageBand blow my mind. He will listen to, he's a weird kid. He likes Kraftwerk and Aphex Twin. So he's super into electronic music. He will listen to one of their albums, and he will go to GarageBand and he will try to recreate the sounds based on the instruments that GarageBand has, and he'll try to recreate the beats using his keyboard and stuff like that. So for me, really, I'm shocked by the ability of young children to do really genuinely interesting creative work if they have the time, if you give them time, unsupervised free time to play, if you give them the space, so if you give them a good, chill place to hang out, and the materials. If you give them good time, space, and materials, it's incredible what kids can do on their own. But that's also true of us. Like, it's incredible what you can come up with if you give yourself the time, space, and materials to play. Like, my 3-year-old just draws the same thing over and over again every day. He'll draw like he's really into the 3 Little Pigs right now. So every day he'll sit down and he'll draw the whole 3 Little Pigs story. He'll just start from the first panel and he'll draw the first little pig and do the whole thing. And you know, you're thinking to yourself, well, that just seems boring. Like, that is so repetitive. But repetition is the mother of all learning. I mean, when he does that, he is making things appear and he's building these, you know, skills in the process of doing this. And it's really inspired me because I've started in my work, I've started doing more repetitive things personally. Like I'll copy the same drawing for a week, or I'll try to emulate my kids because I really feel like my kids are naturally tapped in to these kinds of creative learning that I've just been sort of divorced from through becoming an adult. And I just think it's really raw and powerful.
So do you think that your creativity has reached sort of a plateau? Or do you feel like fulfilled? Do you think that there is room for you to explore new things, to become even more creative?
I think that's what's so interesting about parenting is because when you have kids, it feels like the end of the world. And in some ways it is for a creative person, in that your old ways of working, especially if you're going to be an involved parent, are probably over. Like, that's probably it. And I think it's usually 10 times worse for women because things just fall on the mother that don't otherwise. With fathers. And so there's a really rich literature right now of women writers in particular who are sort of like looking at motherhood and what that does to their creative work and their writing and stuff like that. But if you can get over that sort of end of the world aspect of having kids, it can also be this kind of amazing time where you can kind of reinvent yourself and you can reinvent the way that you work. And that's what it's been for me. It's been this sort of, once I got over the kind of sleep-deprived, just crush of having little kids, now that my kids are a little bit older, all of a sudden I'm having kind of this, I wouldn't call it a renaissance, but it's this kind of new beginning for me in which I can experiment and do new things, and they can work alongside me. I mean, kids are really, they are an interesting excuse to learn all the things that you didn't get the first time around. And so I try to sort of find the Venn diagram before what I care about and what my kids care about. And I try to try to find some overlap. But they're just so naturally curious about everything that it's just infectious. And so it can be like a restart. So for me, I felt like I sort of plateaued, a couple of years ago, but now I feel very much on the cusp of something new. But that has to do a lot with my ideas about the creative career. If you think about a creative career as you just like start here and you just go like this and then you die, like, I think you're going to be really disappointed in your career. Because I think careers kind of go like this. I think they're kind of loopy. It's like a spiral. And every time you start a new project, you're at a new starting point. And you kind of like go into this loop of work. And then I think the creative life is way more cyclical and it's more seasonal and repetitive than we really think it is. And I think the people who are able to have long creative careers are the people who understand that, and they sort of build that kind of seasonal mentality, that kind of cyclical mentality into their process.
Austin, we were talking about creative careers and its loops or good time, bad times, ups, downs that we all experience, all the people that work in creative industries. And actually, you were sharing with us some of the strategies, let's say ways that you deal with that. And actually you wrote a book about it, the Keep Going, and you share some ideas to help people navigate that. I'm not going to ask you to mention the 10 ideas and to summarize them, but I would love if you could choose a few of them and just share them with the people that now are watching this video.
Keep Going is a book I needed to read because, a few years ago, two things happened. One, the sort of political climate in America just kind of went haywire and bad, and the sort of tone of the country kind of changed, and I think for myself and a lot of other creative people, it became so distracting that it felt hard. It not only felt hard to get any work done, it felt meaningless to do work in the sort of face of some of the changes that were happening. And then two was I just had been doing this for like 10 years professionally, and I just felt a little burnt out. So I just wasn't really sure that I wanted to do this anymore. And so Keep Going was a sort of pep talk that I needed to write for myself, that just then became like, oh, well, this is stuff that might help other people. The real meat of Keep Going is just that you sort of have to think about your career as this sort of really long game. It's seasonal. There's going to be spring, summer, fall, and winter, and they're just going to rotate. And you have to sort of know what season you're in and be very flexible. But then the way that you get through that career is by thinking about your days and thinking very specifically about the day as a unit of creative work and how you can sort of build a life in which you take advantage of each day so that those days can kind of pile up and turn into something bigger. So, Keep Going in some ways is a corrective book. It's like what to do when things kind of get out of control. So there are things like I recommend people, a lot of times when you turn your creative work into your career or your job, for example, it feels like a job then. Every job is a job, and every job after a while gets a little like, I don't really want to do this job anymore. So, one of the things I talk about and Keep Going is about how to pull your creative work back out of the marketplace and do things just for the love of it. So I talk, for example, about making gifts for people, doing work not for like doing work for free for like companies or something like that, but like, having some time where you make things just specifically for other people or as a sort of just a non-commercial thing, as a way to kind of like get interested back again in your own work. We're in a culture right now where you're supposed to know which side you're on and pick the side and be on it, and to have this kind of certainty about who you are and what you believe in. And that sort of certainty works really well for politicians, but not for creative people. Like, creative people need time to sort of grapple with hard ideas and to experience different new ideas in safe places. Like, they need safe places to have bad ideas. And so I talk a lot about how you're allowed to change your mind about stuff, that, you are an ever-evolving process and not just a thing. That's another really important topic in the book, as I say, forget the noun, do the verb. So a lot of people talk about, I'm an artist. It's like, forget that. What do you like to do? Well, I really like to draw. Okay, focus on drawing. Because if you worry too much about being the great artist, that's going to block you. It's going to make you, and it's going to make you very rigid, and it's not going to let you take chances. But if you simply worry about drawing, the thing that you really love to do, that'll take you somewhere more interesting and deeper. And so it's corrective stuff like that, but it's also really practical stuff, like just getting, we talked about airplane mode. That's an idea from Keep Going, this idea of building what Joseph Campbell called a bliss station, a place where you go every day that's cut off from like social media, from the news, a place that you can kind of go and like be in your head. I talk a lot about walking. Walking is really important to the book, getting on your own 2 feet, kind of seeing the world with your own eyes. I talk a lot about finding I truly believe that extraordinary work comes from taking the ordinary world and just adding extra attention. So I think if you take the ordinary world and you pay extra attention to it, you get the extraordinary. So we talk about, I talk about just drawing, what a simple act drawing is in this sort of age where everyone can pull the camera out and take a picture, what it's like to actually sit in front of something and draw it and pay enough attention to it that you're making the lines appear on the page. And I talk about really simple things too, like tidying, like cleaning up your studio, just about like what that act is about and about how it's not necessarily about having a perfectly tidy space to work in, but it's about exploring the mess of your studio and about finding inspiration in the actual act of tidying. And so it's sort of a book that asks the reader to think about their life and their career in terms of an ever-evolving process rather than just something, is to be loose and flexible and to sort of think of yourself as this ever-evolving process and not just a great artist or creative or whatever.
Austin, very briefly, because we have talked already about 2 of your books. Yeah. And you mentioned the book that people most asked you about. It was about self-promotion. And you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, and you are right, that we have nowadays more platforms and more tools to self-promote our work and ourselves than ever in history. But it's something that is still extremely hard for all of us to do, extremely hard.
Yeah.
So why do you think that happens?
Well, it's easy to make things exist. It's easy to do the work. Like to make the drawing is not the hardest thing for some people. The hardest thing is to take it and frame it and put it on the wall or to show it to someone, right? Because if you're just like in the privacy of your life and you're making this stuff happen, that's one thing. But to go that next step to actually share this stuff with the world, that takes a lot of guts, because that part is completely unpredictable. You have no control over that part. All you can do is the simple act of sharing and to be intentional with your sharing, and then how people respond to the thing is totally up to them. And that's scary. It just is, in a way that simply making your work isn't. I mean, there is a little bit of fear to looking at a blank page and trying to get a decent drawing to appear, or having a blank GarageBand screen and like, what are you going to make a song? But I think to make that leap to share your work with the world, that can be really scary for people. So what I tried to do in Show Your Work is to try to help people discover a way of sharing their work that doesn't suck energy from the actual making of the work. Because to me, that's the real problem with creative people, is that we want to spend all of our time doing the stuff. We don't want to have to worry about the sharing part. And a lot of times, it's the sharing part that sucks the energy out of us. And so my idea in Show Your Work, whether it's successful or not, is to sort of try to figure out a way to share things in a way that actually adds to the creative process itself rather than subtracts from it. So I talk in Show Your Work a lot about sharing the process of making things, sort of having the guts to take people behind the scenes, to show them how your work is actually done, because I have this sort of deep feeling or conviction that when people see the work that goes into what you do, they start to value it more. I think it's very hard sometimes when people see a perfect finished product for them to really understand what went into it and what the thing is about. And for years, we were told as creative people, you never show anyone your process, right? You never show people how the sausage is made. You never take them behind the scenes. But I think we just live in this new world now where people are just, like my generation, for example, we were raised on DVD extras. Like the behind the scenes clips came with the movie, so we sort of, so like we're used to that now. And I think we're in this 24/7 culture now where we have relationships with artists. They show us what's going on all the time and we have a unique connection with them. So I just think it's sort of this new era, and I wanted to write a book I wanted to show people that there's a very sustainable way of sharing. There's a way of sharing that doesn't take it out of you, it doesn't take very long, and that you can just sort of build these systems where you just share these little bits and pieces, and they add up to something big over time.
Something that surprised me when I read your books is that all of them have kind of the same format. Actually, I love it.
Yeah.
It's 10 ways of something. Yeah. 10 ways of keep going. 10 ways of putting your work out there. Is there a reason behind it? I'm kind of cheating because I know that you love less, and I don't know how much that influenced the way you framed the books.
Yeah. Well, I always joke the list of 10, it's like it was good enough for Moses, so it's good enough for me. But no, I think Steal Like an Artist, I didn't know what I was doing when I wrote Steal Like an Artist. I was like in my late 20s, I was like 27. I didn't know what I was doing. I just thought I was just making a book, just like having fun. And then it sort of became this thing, and it invented a style in a sense, like it became its own style. And so Show Your Work and Keep Going was sort of like, how far can we take this style? And I did think of them as a trilogy. So for me, it was just that thing where you had this thing that worked, and so you just wanted to see how far you could take it. I think that, we talked about reinvention earlier. We talked about thinking of your creative path as cyclical. I'm at a very interesting point in my career right now where I need to decide, do you do another Square book? Do you continue this series that's very popular that people like, or do you try to do something different now? And that's just like a personal thing that I'll have to deal with now. But for me, the joy of these books for me is that they are commercial products that allow me to be as weird and to use as many of my skills as I can. So if I was a novelist, it would be very difficult for me to pitch an editor and say, I want to do a novel that has all these pictures in it, and I want to I want to do it in this funky collage style. I want to do my handwriting in the book. They would be like, what are you talking about? We don't do that here. But because I write these sort of illustrated gift books or in the self-help genre, which is where they're shelved a lot of the time, it actually allows me to be weirder with the books and the format and the design than I would if I was working in a more sort of, I don't know, for lack of a word, literary or serious context, if that makes sense.
But also I think that you love making lists and that you do a lot of lists.
I do love making lists. There is something about the list that is magical in that it's linear, so it takes you 1 through 10, but then you can make leaps in between the items. The items you can sort of it's like in film, you can jump cut in between items, or like in comics where one panel can move to the next. You can sort of cut between ideas, and the meaning comes from the space in between the ideas and how the ideas are kind of bumped up with each other. So when you're putting a list together like I do in the books, it's almost like sequencing an album. You know, the list allows you to guide people through what you're trying to say, but also allows you to jump to interesting places and to be very collage-like. It allows you to mix lots of things together. I think what's so great about a list is that you can write down all the things you want to do, and then when you get to the studio, when you actually have time to work, you just do them. You don't have to worry about what you're going to do. You know, I remember reading David Shrigley, the Scottish artist. He says that he just makes these big, long lists of what he's going to draw when he gets in the studio. He just makes like a list, and then when he gets to the studio, he just sits down and draws them all. And like, that's how he works. And I thought, well, you're supposed to be this, you know, you're supposed to be this wild genius, and you just make lists and go in your studio and draw them. Like, that really appealed to me, you know? And so now it's like, I really believe in the power of lists.
Austin, to wrap up to this long, interesting conversation, something that you would like to share?
I think the thing I want to say to people is relax. This stuff is supposed to make your life better. Like, whether you make a living from your creative work or not, the whole point of doing this kind of stuff, whether you draw, whether you sing, whether you write, whether you make movies, the whole point is to try to make your world, your life, a better place. And if your work is ruining that, it's not worth doing. Like, these things are supposed to improve your life. So I think everyone, you know, collectively, we're such a burnout culture right now, and especially creative people. Everyone just needs to take a deep breath and try to have a little fun with it. Try to lighten up a little bit, because these are heavy times, you know. Just try to lighten up a bit, have fun with it, and at the end of the day, it's supposed to be a good time. This is supposed to be a good time.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you.